It's always great to follow lunch and a mindfulness session, so I'm super excited to have an opportunity to speak with you today. And we'd just like to start with an expression of gratitude. Thank you for choosing to spend your time in this forum for this discussion, and thank you for joining this session as an anchor for how we think about equity. In terms of the opportunity to create economic opportunity for the global economy, so much of that starts with the powerful signals that we're able to glean within our platform. So really excited to be able to share some of that with you today. First and foremost, we'd just like to anchor us in sort of what is our intelligence engine and our intelligence capability. Haley Alexander, in an earlier session this morning, talked about our customer science capability, which really brought together 6 functional areas to begin to think about how we can think differently about our ability to tell stories based on the power of our economic graph, which is now 875 million members strong, 59 million company pages, 88,000 product pages, and 39,000 skills. What that allows us to do with this robust environment is really to understand both the workforce, but also interest areas, product areas, and to be in a really strong position to look at this at a global level. And to provide to our customers and to our partners a really robust view of the trends that are shaping and creating opportunities within our economy. The customer science function, which I began to talk about, which Haley referenced, is really an advisory solution set that came together over the past year, very much inspired by opportunities that emerged out of COVID, to think about as our world is evolving and things are becoming more complex and more challenging, how do we anchor ourselves, leveraging our unique economic graph to sort of think about the big ideas, new mental models, thinking about new data solutions, which Haley's team manages. How do we measure? How do we quantify the potential and the impact? And so much of what I'll be sharing with you today is really the work that comes out of that integrated advisory and specialist function, which Customer Insights is a part of. So a couple of things that are really part of the new normal that we spend a lot of time thinking about, and why it's so important that we anchor our conversation around equity in the opportunity to create a different level of decision intelligence. First, heightened uncertainty, which I think we're all feeling. But when we actually look at the data, there are studies that have been done, one by consultancy AlixPartners, which found that over 70% of executives are now concerned that within the next year they're going to lose their role. So when you're operating in that type of an environment of heightened executive uncertainty, consumer uncertainty, the idea of having a higher level of decision intelligence and decision support becomes really important. And we've been taking a very thoughtful and intentional approach on how we organize our advisory assets to make the best use of our unique data ecosystem. I think in an earlier session today, Dan Horowitz also mentioned the idea of being bold. And to be bold in uncertain times, you need to have a very robust engine of decision support. And so we have that, and we're putting that engine to use, again, for our customers and our partners. We're also seeing evolving expectations in this environment. So research that we've done among our member base, also coming out of COVID, has found that the expectations that audiences have for the quality of the content that they receive is evolving. One of the truths of COVID is that a lot of content was produced. There was actually a glut of content. What that means is that we're now at a point where over 70% of audiences for business intelligence are saying that more than half of what they receive is not valuable, it's not insightful, it's not useful. So how do you break through and show up differently at a time where there's a lot more content that you have to bring through, and to meet this evolving expectation to be provocative and thoughtful, and to add value by bringing forward not ideas that validate, but ideas that expand and paint new pictures around sort of the art of the possible for customers, again, and partners. And then there's also just shifting paradigms. Again, what were traditional categories with very clean lines, we're now having to navigate much more complex ecosystems, more complex and more expansive buying groups, for example. So the idea of being able to be a resource and to leverage our data set to provide decision support, critically important. And we think about that across 3 levels or 3 altitudes when we think about our ability to have signal detection to support decision making. At the most foundational level, or say the 5,000-foot level, it's our marketing signal. So what do we see happening in platform that's really around engagement with content? The next level up, let's say 10,000-foot level, are the business and industry signals. Where do we see growth, for example? Where do we see talent transition? And then at the highest level, it's societal signals. Where do we see the evolving need states and priorities, especially for critical areas like equity, when we think about growing economic opportunity? And we are seeing very powerful signals within our ecosystem in that regard, which we'll share with you today. So in terms of marketing signals and what we can interpret in the platform, really what we're seeing is that not only do we have a growing member base, again, 875 million across 200 countries, but that is a healthy, thriving, and increasingly engaged member base. So we see year-over-year increases in feed updates, year-over-year increases in conversations on platform, and public content that's being shared. What that means is that the pattern detection engine that we have and our ability to pick up signals to help fuel decision support, assets, resources, and advisory is even stronger. So it's not just that we're growing and we have a growing passive audience, but we have a growing engaged audience that creates very powerful signals in terms of the conversations that matter and the content that is in fact actually breaking through. We are also looking at signals in terms of where our customers are allocating their resources and their dollars. And very interesting, yesterday we had the benefit of Karen Kimbrough spending time on the main stage talking about some of the trends that she's seeing. And she said, even though there's uncertainty, there's also a significant amount of opportunity. And what we're seeing in terms of spend objectives is that we actually are seeing our customers invest in brand. And that is where we're seeing growth. And what she emphasized yesterday is that that piece is critically important at a time where you are seeing some companies pull back on spend. When we look at our top customers in terms of their spend, we continue to see increases across a number of sectors, technology, financial services, being among the two, also healthcare. In services that Karen also talked about yesterday, like travel, we see increases not only among our top spending customers, but also across the full overall customer set in terms of spend and platform. So while there's uncertainty and there's some retrenchment in spend, we continue to see strong signals of investment. And one of the points that Karen made was investment in brand, which is an area where we are also seeing increases, which is at a time when overall we're seeing some pullback. What that is doing is actually pulling some of that clutter out of the environment and creating opportunities for the brands that are willing to continue to invest to increase the likelihood that their investments will break through. And that on the other side of this period of uncertainty, they will emerge as leaders in their space. And so we are seeing clear signals in that regard with increases in spend at the higher or upper funnel, which is related to brand, but also mid-funnel, related to consideration. The next here, which are the business signals in terms of where do we see evolution in the industries that are active in platform and the size of company. So over the past 5 years, what we've seen is, Over the past 5 years, what we've seen is growth across the full size range of companies. So not only small businesses, but also mid and large sized companies. So again, when we think about the growing member base, we also have more signals at the company level, increasing the robustness of our platform from a signal detection standpoint, with small business being one of the areas that's growing the most, adding a lot of diversity to our ecosystem. When we look at the top sectors, for example, we see technology, financial services, and a whole range that are continuing to grow as sectors with presence in platform. But we also have a strong number globally that are growing and increasing that we would consider our emerging areas. So growth in the health sector, interior design, construction, for example, areas that have not traditionally been thought of as prime targets for LinkedIn. And so again, that is increasing the opportunity for the stories that we can tell, but also the signals that we can detect across a much broader range of organizations. We also are seeing that to a large extent, when we look at sort of the top interests that are being discussed, that there's a lot that is happening at the intersections of business and society. So that's one of the reasons why we thought it was important to have this conversation anchor the discussion that's going to bridge into our deeper discussions around equity, because many of these conversations are increasingly having that as a through line. So we have politics and law emerging strongly. We have science and the environment. And so, for example, we've just had a significant presence at COP27, developing narratives around sustainability, when we look at the opportunity to talk about and analyze the conversations that are happening in platform around that particular topic. And then even more broadly, society and culture. So at the highest possible level, 30,000-foot level, when we look at sort of what our audiences are prioritizing at the level of issues, what we are seeing is that very discrete issues, such as International Women's Day, for example, when we think about gender equality as a conversation that would happen in platform, we've actually seen significant triple-digit percentage point increases in terms of the amount of conversation and engagement that is happening in platform around that discrete moment. We also have Pride Month as another example when we think about LGBTQ community. Consistent spikes over the past few years around that moment in terms of increased engagement with content. The opportunity lies, though, when you look at sort of the smaller peaks that are happening around sort of companies leaning in on these conversations and the ability to actually galvanize and activate our community with respect to engagement around this topic. We see it across sectors, nonprofits, for example, but finance, healthcare, and also within education. And so again, the idea of being able to play within that space and to contribute to those conversations, we're definitely seeing strong engagement in these areas from our audiences. And then lastly, this is just a broad view to paint the picture, again, as we bridge into the equity conversation, that when we look across a range of issues, topics, coming back to that idea of that intersection between business and issues conversations, whether it's Earth Day as a discrete moment or sustainability broadly as an example, we see significant double-digit increases in both the company posts in that particular area as well as the engagement of our member base in those conversations. We've already talked a bit about International Women's Day and Pride, but we also have the broader range of diversity and equity conversations when we talk about accessibility and issues such as mental health, all areas where we see increased post activity and engagement from members. And so when we think about the possibility for LinkedIn not only to be a platform for communicating these types of messages to audiences, but also being a resource for creating foundational understanding around how these issues are intersecting with business, we are seeing very strong signals that our community is a vibrant space and our member base and our unique economic graph through which to unpack and deepen understanding on how to engage around these issues in ways that really do, again, intersect with and add value to the business conversation. And so to close with a few key takeaways, we really do have these three levels of signals that we spend a lot of time focusing on as a customer science organization with respect to pattern detection and opportunity and value unlock for our customers and our partners. Marketing signals, again, are the starting point where we're really just looking at the growth, the follows, and the engagement in platform. The next level up are the business signals, where we're really unpacking where are we seeing growth across sectors in terms of publishing, where we're seeing differences and evolution in skills, transition of the workforce at the business level. And then at the highest level, when we talk about issues such as equity, there's a very strong indication that we can be a strong intelligence partner in providing the types of decision support that really reside at that critical intersection between business and societal issues across communities that are being most impacted, and we have significant opportunity to really deliver on the promise of creating economic opportunity for the underserved or the challenged. And so